Along the Buford Pusser Highway between Adamsville and Selmer, 4 miles out of Adamsville, about 8 miles if you're coming from Selmer, will be this memorial for the site of his crash and his death. And that sign is really leaning. You would kind of think somebody would straighten this up. Okay, since we're going to try to separate some facts from myth, here's what I've been able to put together from reliable sources. First of all, this in 1974 was not a 4-lane. It would have been a 2-lane road. Second, you notice there's a great big spot here like a pull-off, and I don't think that's intentional even for this. I believe that is more than likely the actual old 2-lane road with a little ditch and this bank that his car would have come up, bounced across to where it hit its final resting place. Now, there's a lot of speculation on this. He was coming from Adamsville, which was this direction, down this road, headed towards Selmer, which is about 8 miles in that direction. Was he speeding? Probably. He was a guy with money in a Corvette. Was he drinking? There's a good chance of that. He'd been out previously that night. Drinking and driving was not uncommon in that era. Unless unless you were going all over the road, you weren't even going to get pulled over. That's just the way it was then. Did he simply get distracted by something? Maybe messing with the radio. Who knows? He could have dropped something. Whatever caused him to run off the road and have this crash. The other theory is that he was murdered, that he was somehow run off the road, and most people like that theory because that sits better with building the legend, I guess. But more than likely, it was just an accident. The man had been out of office 4 years at this point. If someone had wanted to take him out, they would have done it somewhere in that 4-year span if revenge had been an issue. So my guess is it was simply an accident. And again, with cars of that era, Corvettes made out of fiberglass, any kind of wreck, it wasn't that uncommon to have an accident where a car burst into flames. Much less likely for that to happen in the era we live in now, not the way stuff was built in the late 60s, early 70s. Adamsville, Tennessee. This little cemetery is basically in town, just on the edge of town. A little bit of road noise. Final resting place of Buford Pusser and his wife, who of course was murdered. Hollywood doing what Hollywood does, it took some liberties with this movie. If you've seen the Walking Tall movie, you remember there were 2 children in it. In reality, he had 2 stepchildren and 1 daughter. The oldest child wasn't included in the movie, which is why it just showed a son and a daughter, and this is his real daughter. Adamsville, let's go visit a house. Not just any house. Buford Pusser's house. So I was really looking forward to touring this home, which turned into an absolute disaster, unfortunately, for several reasons we'll talk about in a moment. But we'll get to one of the interesting things here. Is Buford Pusser was, of course, listed in the local telephone book. This is the 1960s, early 1970s. It was after that, before it became common or even an option in most areas, to have your telephone number unlisted. And that was a service that you had to pay an extra fee for which is the only reason the telephone companies finally made it available. But as for the tour, it's $10 for an adult to go in here. They do not allow videoing, which is why you're seeing these pictures, and I honored what I was supposed to by not taking video. Now, when I went in, I was the only person there other than the two older ladies that worked, who were off in a side room with the door shut and what sounded like a television going. You could plainly see there was a camera so they could see what was going on outside. I yelled, I hollered, I made a little bit of noise. It was about 10 minutes before anyone came out. And the first lady that came out was really annoyed that I was there and looking at things and had not paid my $10 yet. Like this was somehow my fault. So I happily gave her the money. And while this is a self-guided tour, and I wanted her to go with me, hoping I could learn something, they won't let you start the tour until you sit through a 10 or 15 minute video on Buford Pusser. I hate that in most places anyway. I certainly don't want it forced on me. And worse than anything else, this was not a video on his life or the history or the things that happened. It was basically 10 or 15 minutes of random local people that I don't know telling me in little 15-second clips what a great person Buford Pusser was. So that was a complete waste of time, and I was really annoyed that I had to sit through that. Now, going on with the tour and trying my best to make friends with this lady, who I think she said had worked there for 13 years or 15 years or whatever as a volunteer. I could not get her to talk about anything. Anything I asked a question about, her response was, "Did you read the book? Did you buy the book?" No, I didn't buy the book. I already know a lot of this stuff, but I'd be happy to buy the book. Well, come to find out, downstairs they have a little gift shop and bookstore, but they're out of the book. So I couldn't have bought the book even if I wanted to buy the book. But that became the answer to anything, so I never got an answer to any question that I asked. That wasn't a snarky, "Did you read the book? You didn't read the book, did you?" Well, this particular book she was referring to was written by Buford Pusser's daughter, Dwana. And this is why I didn't think a lot of this tour. This seemed more like the Dwana Pusser Museum than it did the Buford Pusser Museum, in that the majority of things in there have to do with her. And while I understand she was a child when she lost her parents, I understand the story. I certainly feel bad. She was raised in this house by her grandparents. And what a traumatic, horrible thing that was. That's not really what I'm interested in. And that just seemed like what it was all about her and a money grab for them to sell the book that she had written. When I got down to the gift shop, the other lady I was fine with. I had no problem talking to. This first lady, I'm not going to blame her. I'm just going to chalk it up to she and I had a personality conflict of some type. Maybe I reminded her of somebody she doesn't like. I don't know what it was, but I could never get her to warm up to me at all. And the kicker to this, in the middle of my little self-guided tour, they decided, since no one else was there, that they were just going to close an hour early and go home. So she made it really plain that she just wanted me out of there so they could go home. Well, again, for something run by this town, this city, that's a really lousy way to treat your people that are coming through there. And if she had said, "Hey, the weather's bad, we don't have anybody else here, you know, it's 2 o'clock or whatever in the afternoon, we're thinking about closing up earlier than normal, I would have said, hey, no problem, I can come back tomorrow. But I was not given that option. Instead, it was, we'll take your money and then we'll kick you out, rush you through and kick you out. So I have been in, I would say, easily 100 different small town museums for all sorts of things. Some of these you guys have seen on my channel. A lot of them are things I did that I never made videos of. But I can tell you, this was in my top couple of worst experiences. It truly was. As a matter of fact, it may have been the worst experience I ever had for something that I paid for. So, if you decide to go through there and do this, take what I'm telling you with a grain of salt. You can get an idea of what's here. I didn't take pictures of all the stuff concerning the daughter, but some of the stuff with Buford. And the things that are interesting when you finally get downstairs is they have this large rack that basically somebody has done a really good job on over the years, that has basically every newspaper story you can possibly think of that was done from the late 60s all the way into when he died in 74 and a couple of years after that, when there were people questioning, was his death accidental? And all of these things from different newspapers around the country, and especially all the local newspapers, are there. And if you actually can have the time to look at those, unlike I did, you would probably enjoy that. So enough complaining about anything to do with that. There's one more thing here, and this is their drawing card now to get people interested, I'm sure, in coming out there, which is in the basement. There's the car, the Corvette that he actually died in, plus another car that he owned. And there's a little bit of a story behind that, so we'll get to that in a second. I will say this, there are a couple of more videos coming up that are going to relate to other things in this county, and we're going to get pretty in-depth into the Walking Tall movie and what was true and what was Hollywoodized and what was just plain false. Because the real story is rather fascinating once you get the Hollywood gibberish out of it. Now, back to the car in the basement. Since I was already out of the house by then, I was allowed to shoot video of this last part for a few seconds. This car used to be sitting down around Pigeon Forge, Tennessee for many, many years. There was a police museum in that Pigeon Forge area before you get into Gatlinburg. The Pigeon Forge area being where Dollywood is. And this car was there for many, many years. As a matter of fact, that's where I saw it the first time. Apparently, sometime in the last 7 or 8 years, whatever, this police museum closed, and the car ended up back over here at his home place. So, if you were around that Dollywood area and all that tourist stuff at one time, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and you ventured into that Carbo or Carpos or whatever it was police museum, you would have seen this exact car. So again, I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to ask any questions down in the comment section below. I'll be happy to answer what I can. I think you'll enjoy these next couple of videos I'm going to do on this subject even more than this video. We'll talk soon.